Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. Hope you're all in tip-top form, and today I'm going to be showing you some CD purchases from charity shops or thrift stores as you call them in the States, and these were all £1 or less. Okay, first up we've got Bryan Ferry, Dylanesque, and this is on the Virgin record label. It was his 12th studio album and came out in 2007. As the title suggests, it's an album of Dylan cover versions, but sadly there's nothing here to match the speeded up art rock version of A Hard Rains Are Gonna Fall, which featured on These Foolish Things, Bryan Ferry's first solo album way back in 1973. It's always a joy to hear Bryan Ferry's voice, but the choice of songs and the arrangements is quite safe here. It is notable, however, because it's got a contribution by Brian Eno, contributing electronics to the track If Not For You. Next up, it's NAZARETH Greatest Hits, and this is on the Salvo label. And this uses the 1975 Greatest Hits album as its starting point, but the CD reissue adds another 8 songs, including 6 from the period 1976 through to 1991. I was expecting the quality to drop off on these later tracks, but the continuing presence of the original 4-piece lineup I think helps maintain the high standards of the earlier tracks. The band covers the spectrum from hard rock through pop-friendly singles to convincing ballads as well. Highlights for me on the album include This Flight Tonight, Holy Roller, My White Bicycle and Hair of the Dog. Next we have Only the Strong Survive, Bruce Springsteen, and this was on the Columbia label, and it was his 21st studio album and it came out in 2022. Amazingly, I got this in a deal at the charity shop, brand new sealed, 3 for £1. So to put that into some perspective, if you go to Costa Coffee, a flat white costs you £3.75. Many of Springsteen's best songs owe a debt of gratitude to soul and R&B, so I think it was always a matter of time before he would cover these songs on an album. By track 2, Soul Days, which features Sam Moore, I was already hooked. The lyric, "Those yesterdays cruising in my Chevrolet, I held my baby in my arms, but my first love was always the songs," works as a perfect summary of Springsteen's career. I must say though, I'm not so keen on his producer Ron Anelo playing most of the instruments. It would have had a better feel with a full band, ideally the E Street Band, laying down the basic tracks live in the studio. And I note that that's exactly what happened with the E Street Band when they worked on Springsteen's previous album, Letter to You. The fact that Only the Strong Survive was recorded during the COVID lockdown obviously forced Springsteen's hand to go down this route with his producer. Next up, it's Tangerine Dream and Electronic Meditation. This is on the Sanctuary label, and it's their debut album from 1970. This was decades before they drifted into lucrative film soundtrack work and new age music. It's a challenging listen, taking influences from free jazz and the avant-garde electronic classical compositions of Karlheinz Stockhausen. The only concession to the rock audience is the presence of guitar, organ and drums. If you like John Cale era Velvet Underground, the occasional brutal and repetitive cello may pull you in, as may the drumming. I must say I loved it, and at the premature conclusion of the final track, Resurrection, I immediately wanted to hear more of the same. Moving along, it's a various artist compilation called Golden Crest Instrumentals featuring the Wailers, and it was put out on the Ace record label. And this was at the time when Ace had a never-ending or seemingly never-ending supply of original masters and previously unreleased tracks from the original rock and roll era. The main selling point here is the first ever release of the Wailers' first studio session from 1958, and you also get 2 previously unreleased tracks by Little Jerry Williams, who would re-emerge a few years later as the soul singer Swamp Dogg. Okay, now we've got Band of Horses and Cease to Begin, and this is on the Sub Pop label. rock critic darlings, I think they actually started to deliver on all the hype on this, their second album. The band had some strong songs here, which always helps. And if I was being hypercritical, it's a little too slow and laid back. Having said that, there's always a lyrical couplet, a surprising left turn to a tune, or there's a tasteful instrumental embellishment, which helps keep you on your toes. Next, it's the SPOTNICKS and Around the World and in Acapulco on the Riverside record label. I'd never actually heard the SPOTNICKS before. I'd always assumed they were a Swedish version of the Shadows and the Ventures in spacesuits. These two albums may not be typical of their sound, as they date from 1966 and 1967, and it finds them splitting the tracks between vocal and instrumentals. The vocals are actually really cringeworthy. They sort of remind me of the vocals you might get on a budget label doing cover versions of chart hits, and the non-musicians in the band having to decide who on earth is going to do a lead vocal. It's that bad. The added organ on some of the instrumentals, I'm thinking here of Tinta Verde, for example, and Green Eyes, have a real kitsch appeal, a bit like listening to the BBC test card in 1970. Next, it's Rainbow Rising on Polydor. This was their second album, originally came out in 1976. The lineup here includes Richard Blackmore, Ronnie James Dio and Cozy Powell. It's an album that totally passed me by the first time around. Heard now, I can appreciate the intricacy of the guitar, keyboards and drums, and also the presence of the Munich Philharmonic Orchestra on the epic track Stargazer. There are riffs aplenty here, melodic earworms and a hard rock energy, and also a nod to progressive rock song structures on the two longer tracks. And next it's MOWER and People Are Cruel on the Transcopic label. The band was discovered by Blur guitarist Graham Coxon, signed to his label Transcopic, and Coxon also produced their first album in a very lo-fi style. On this, their second album, songwriter Matthew Mott raises his game, and the singles After Dark and Morning After, to me, sound like a speeded up Pixies. Rest in Peace is influenced by the Kinks, and No One Is Royalty sounds like a jolly English music hall song with a touch of Paul McCartney in there as well. In an ideal world, Matthew Mott should have had far more success and had some hit singles back in the Britpop era. Okay, this is Joni Mitchell and Wild Things Run Fast on the Geffen label. And it was her 11th studio album and her first for the Geffen label. It's got a slick jazz pop sound, very similar to Steely Dan. Chinese Cafe, which segues into a cover of Unchained Melody, is the highlight for me. Another highlight is Ladies Man, with nice cool vocal from Mitchell and some soulful backing, which sounds like something you'd find on a Luther Vandross record. Next, we've got Galliano, A Joyful Noise Unto the Creator, and this is on the Talking Loud label, and it's the second album from this acid jazz band. It's a mix of soulful, chilled out songs and also raps from Rob Gallagher, which remind me, I must say, quite disconcertingly, of fellow Londoner Ian Dury. The presence of Mick Talbot as producer and also contributing keyboards to a handful of the tracks provides a link back to the late 70s mod revival and the Style Council, of course. Next we've got GIUDA and Let's Do It Again. And I managed to get this one brand new, sealed in a charity shop for £1. They're an Italian band influenced by UK's 70s glam. If you think of Slaughter and the Dogs, with retro glam looks and an almost cartoon bother boy attitude, you're sort of getting to where they come from. They can make you smile whilst delivering a rock and roll adrenaline rush. This was their second album from 2013. Subjects covered include such glam staples as Teenage Rebellion, Wild Women, roller skating and boogieing. You know, what's not to like? Okay, next we've got Highlights, the very best of Yes, and this is on Atlantic. And it was a comp which tries to condense their long career into one CD, or at least up to the period The Big Generator, which came out in 1987. It's an impossible task to do, of course. It's nice, however, to have the tracks Survival from their debut album and Time and a Word from the second album. Moving on, we come to CARIBOU and Swim on the City Slang label. And this was Dan Snafe's third album under the name CARIBOU. It's an album for people making tentative first steps into electronic dance music. It's a mellow album with irritating dated vocoder vocals. It's okay, but I came away thinking it was a bit of an empty listening experience. This was far better. It's a Rainer Maria and Look Now, Look Again on the Polyvinyl label. It was a very pleasant surprise to find this in a charity shop. I loved their album Long Knives Drawn, which came out more than 20 years ago. I was all in at that time on Midwest emo and bands like The Promise Ring and American Football. And Rainer Maria's intelligent lyrics, beautiful melodies and passionate delivery made them, for me, soulmates of those bands. Look Now, Look Again dates from 4 years previous to that album, and it's a bona fide classic. The male-female vocals are raw, intense, and really quite moving at times. Okay, so real mixed bag this time.